Alright everyone, it's Hugh Sweeney here, and what a week it's been for cameras. Firstly, the Canon R5 being released alongside its little brother, the R6. Two amazing cameras, everything we could possibly want from Canon, everything we were complaining about that the Canon cameras didn't have are released, and more, let's face it. But then of course Sony come along and they blow Canon out of the water with their specs for the A7S III. Absolutely amazing, on paper at least. Specs from that camera. What it can do, what it cannot do isn't worth talking about. It's an amazing camera. So it was rather disappointing for a lot of us who were so excited about getting the R5, and it was actually ever so slightly cringy, and it reminded me of the 2017 Oscars in which Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway wrongly presented La La Land with Best Picture instead of giving it to Moonlight, sorry. So that was it was one of those moments. It was almost cringy, and all of a sudden I noticed that a lot of people were kind of giving out about the R5. Now, in fairness, the complaints about the R5 in regards to overheating are fully justified, completely justified. But a lot of people were saying that the A7S III, is way better than the Canon R5 and all this. And you know what? It is. It's a better camera on paper. But a lot of people are very quick to forget that the R5 is a much better hybrid camera than the A7S III. It's much better. If you're a photographer and videographer and you need to do both types of work professionally, then the R5 is a much better choice for you, and that's why I actually stuck with the R5. But I have to say that since I started doing video a couple of years ago, I've never been so tempted to go for a Sony camera as I have been this week. Now, I know that YouTube is awash with, YouTubers, video guys like myself doing comparison videos, and you're probably not really looking for another review of a Canon R5 or a Sony A7S III by someone who doesn't have it in their hands. I do apologize, I don't have either camera in my hands. I did order one of them, and that was the R5. And I'm going to give to you a couple of reasons in this video why I went with the R5, why I stuck with Canon. But before I give you those reasons why I went with the R5, let's just kind of recap on a few things that I really like about both cameras. Starting off with the Sony A7S III, obviously, the low light capabilities on the Sony A7S III are just trump. They're just amazing. And when you have a camera that can shoot in low light, it really opens up so many doors for you. There was jobs I did recently using the S1. It's quite good in low light, nowhere near the Sony, but it was quite good. And I just couldn't believe how comfortable I was recording those jobs. And in the past, years ago, even with the Canon EOS R, you just cannot do those jobs. And when you have a really good low light camera, it's just amazing. So that's one thing I just love about the Sony. And the dynamic range as well. They're two huge things. In fact, those things are more important than anything for me. Dynamic range and low light capabilities are just amazing on the Sony. So they're way ahead of the Canon for that. But there's a few things there, smaller things that I also like. The new card slots in the Sony, those smaller cards, two of the same cards. You're not sort of using different cards. You got two of the same. You can double up with SD cards as well, which are much cheaper. If you're shooting high volume content like interviews and stuff, and you don't want to be using lots of expensive cards, you can get just cheaper cards and lower quality and all that. I love the electronic hot shoe on the Sony as well, on the A7S III. The ability just to use those digital microphones and not need to plug in a microphone, and you just have a lovely neat package without wires coming out of it. That is just a really, really cool feature. I'm loving that about the Sony. 16-bit out on the HDMI as well. There's just so much to love. What more do you want from a camera? Plus the large HDMI connection on the Sony as well. Way more robust than these smaller connections. I really wish Canon had gone for that on the R5. It's just such a pity they haven't, because even the one on the Canon EOS R, the smaller micro HDMI connection, it's not that robust, and going smaller again, it's just asking for trouble. So Sony have literally hit the ball out of the park, and it's bounced back, and they've hit it out of the park again. They've really, really delivered on this. But it's been 6 years since the Sony A7S II, and I think, we kind of almost expect it. Alright, so let's look at a few of the things about the Canon R5 that may be kind of better than the Sony. A few things that I like. Of course, obviously the 8K internal RAW ability there. Now, a lot of people think that 8K is overkill, and yes, it is overkill, but it's still 8K, and the ability to shoot in 8K 8K is actually quite good, and it's very future proof, let's face it. And you know, 4K is kind of old hat now, even though most of us still use HD. This has been shot in HD, but the ability to shoot stuff in 8K, should you need it, should you need to capture some high resolution stuff, particularly say if you were shooting some wildlife stuff, or even some fashion shoots where you wanted to get a whole load of clips, a whole load of stills from something happening, even sports events or something, you might be able to extract stills, really high quality raw stills as well. So 8K, you know, don't rule it out, and that's very powerful as well. Obviously Canon, they've done a few other things as well with the camera. The first thing, the most obvious thing, is the Canon R5 is a far superior hybrid camera to the actual Sony A7S III. Nobody's going to be buying the Sony A7S III for photography. They're going to be buying the Canon. You know, that's what it's for. It's 45 megapixel. It's going to be a brilliant product photography camera. It's going to be a powerful print photography camera if you're into doing blown up prints and you want really good resolution there. So, you know, Canon have nailed it. They've great photography features. The focus for, you know, again, wildlife stuff, I'll get to that in a minute. It's really good focus features, way up on the Canon EOS R. So there's a few other little things there with the Canon, like rolling shutter, maybe better on the Canon than the Sony. I'm not exactly sure, but I did watch a video by a guy called Dan Watson. He's got a great YouTube channel, and he's got a really cool comparison video, a side-by-side breakdown between the Sony A7S III and the Canon R5. It's quite cool, so do watch that. I'll leave it in the links below. So the Canon might have a little bit of advantage there with the image stabilization and rolling shutter over the Sony, and of course, you know, it might have slightly sharper 4K as well. If you're into shooting 4K, we'll say standard frame rates like 24 and 30 frames per second, where the Canon is downsizing it as opposed to resampling every second line to achieve 4K. Well, then you've got nicer 4K on the actual Canon, but it might come at a cost where you have slightly less dynamic range. And you know, let's be honest, the Sony just, it's probably not, the difference probably isn't that noticeable that you just say, okay, I'm going for the Canon there. You'll probably always go for the Sony. So the Canon has higher bitrate recording as well than the Sony internally. I don't know if it's going to be that noticeable, but it is nice to have. So there's a few advantages there with the Canon, of course. So right, you know, obviously each camera has got its advantages, price point as well. The Canon is a little bit more expensive than the Sony. There's not that much in it. Sony is like $3.5 grand, the Canon is $4. Over here in Europe, the Canon is about almost $5 grand, including VAT, and the Sony is trailing behind as well by a little bit. So anyway, they're both great cameras, but I'm going to give you a little rundown now on some reasons why I went for the Canon R5, and I'll share them with you. And perhaps if you're kind of on the line, a little bit on the line like some of us are, you might be able to sort of relate to some of my reasons, and I might help you decide. Who knows? I like to try and give value of some sort. So here's my reasons why I went for the Canon R5. I don't know if I have 5 reasons. Should I? Will I have 5 reasons? Maybe I will. I don't know. I haven't counted them. There's not that many maybe. But there's a few really legit reasons why I went with the R5. So let's get straight into it. The first reason I went for the R5 over the Sony A7S III, even though I was very tempted, is the hybrid camera ability of the R5. It is a far superior hybrid camera to the Sony A7S III. It's better at both. If you want to do photography and video, if you want to sort of do equal parts of both, you're probably better with the R5 than, of course, the Sony A7S III. It's as simple as that. Now, I don't know about the Sony A7S III for low light photography. If it was a thing you were doing a lot of late night nightclub and pub photography where you're shooting stuff like social events and stuff, you might be better off with the Sony because you're delivering those jobs in fairly low resolution. You may not need the resolution of the Canon R5, but in most cases, and definitely in my cases where I do some product stuff and I do some sort of high resolution stuff, I just want the hybrid ability of the Canon R5. The fact that you can bring that camera with you, you can do handheld filmmaking with really good in-body stabilization, then you can double up really high-end, high-quality photography. So that is hands down, it goes to Canon, and that's a huge reason for me to go for the Canon R5. Now the second reason, I should hold up 2 fingers, the second reason I decided to go for the Canon R5, it's a slightly different reason to why many people would be going for it. It's bird photography. So So I love photographing birds as a hobby. It's not something I'm really dedicated to or really serious about. I don't go out there and camo up and put layers of netting over myself and wait in the field for like 6 hours back to back for a raptor to land on a post. You see some of these guys, they'll find like a dead pigeon or something and they'll tape it down to a post in the hope that a hawk lands in it and they'll get that perfect picture. I don't do any of that. What I do is I love getting up early in the morning, going for a walk out to the countryside. I get a bit of exercise and I bring my camera with me and I take photographs of birds and I just love it. I'm really interested. Maybe I'm a little bit more serious than that, but the Canon R5 is vastly superior over the Canon EOS R for bird photography. Now I've been using the EOS R for bird photography and I will say hands down, it sucks. It's just not a good bird photography camera, particularly from the actual, the frame per second burst mode that it'll give you. It'll only give you five workable shots per second in servo mode, servo focus mode, which is the mode you really need to have the camera on most of the time. So the Canon EOS R was not good, but the R5 is a huge step up. I've seen the videos about the focus, the eye tracking, and even the bird tracking and all that. So it is hands down really good camera for wildlife and stuff. Now it's still going to have problems, that we'll say DSLRs don't, because with DSLRs you're looking through the actual lens and you're blocked only partially by the mirror flipping on to let the light through to the sensor, whereas with the mirrorless camera it's actually processing the image and you're looking at a digital image that's refreshed every couple of seconds, plus the shutter comes down, it's blacking it out. So generally mirrorless cameras are a bit slower for that stuff. So I'm hoping that I get away with it. I did see some photographers mention that it could be a little bit better, so I'm worried about that, but it will give you 12 frames per second burst mode and 20 frames per second in silent mode as well. So that is a huge thing for me, so I'm really excited about the wildlife bird photography side of it. Now before I finish on that, something very interesting as well with the Canon R5, you've got 8K as well, so you have the ability to shoot really high-res video as well of, we'll say, things you want to crop in a lot on. So if you're doing video of wildlife or something like that, you have 8K and you can really crop right down, so you can add sort of strength and length to your zoom lens as well. And speaking of that, Canon have some cool new zoom lenses out, some really lightweight zoom lenses, like they have a new 800mm prime lens. Now it's f11, and before you cry at the thought of photographing with a lens that's f11, now they have a 600 that's f11 and an 800 that's f11, but they're very modestly priced lenses. And as I said, before you cry at the thought of shooting at f11, think of video purposes, because when you're shooting video you have much slower shutter speeds than you have with photography in most cases. So those lenses could be really good for filming stuff at a long way away. And then you have the 8K resolution. So if you were a wildlife filmmaker and you want to shoot videos of animals and stuff, I think that the Canon will be hands down the camera to go for. Okay, so that's a kind of a wildlife bird thing that I think that the Canon is just going to be great for. And one little thing that I'd love to see them do, I would like to see Canon actually give you a crop, a true 4K crop, pixel on pixel from the center of the actual sensor. So you're only going to be using like a sensor that's the size of an MFT sensor in the middle of your sensor, but it's going to be true 4K. And if Canon could give you that in 120 frames per second, pixel on pixel, good quality, and not overheat, then it would be a brilliant wildlife video camera. So I've spoken a lot about the wildlife thing, but that is something that I just love doing, and it's a huge reason for me to go for this camera. So that's reason number 2. So the third reason, I gotta figure out a way of holding up 3 fingers. It's hard to keep the little finger down. So the third reason I would like to go for the R5 and I would choose it over the Sony is the RF lenses. Now, Sony make great lenses, Panasonic make great lenses. I think all the manufacturers make really good lenses, but I think the RF lenses, I don't know what it is. I just think the Canon lenses are beautiful. Maybe it's just how they look, that red ring and just the texture. I really like some of their lenses, especially their 22 to 70, mid-range zoom. It's the sort of focal length that we use a lot, and about 90% of the work I do is within that range. So it's a beautiful lens. And some of the other lenses from Canon as well, those RF lenses, and the way they focus, it's a big step up from using the old Canon EF mount lenses with an adapter. Even though those work really well with the Canon system, the Canon RF system. I think the new lenses and their accuracy with focusing, because of the distance from the lens to the sensor, it's just really reliable. And I know the Sony lenses are going to work flawlessly as well, and Sony have great lenses, but I do believe that Canon have some better lenses at the moment. So if you were to get a package and just want the absolute best lenses, I think Canon are ahead, and it's one of the reasons that I want to go for the Canon R5 as opposed to the Sony. So those are a couple of reasons that I decided to stick with Canon. And I gotta say, like, you know, it's been the first time I've really wanted to go for a Sony camera, and you know, I still actually want to go for it. And what really frustrates me the most about choosing you know, one brand is that you cannot interchange lenses. Years ago, you know, you could buy a Blackmagic camera, and even today you can buy, like, you get yourself an A7SIII Pro or a Blackmagic Pocket 6K camera, and you can buy it in a Canon mount, and you can just put Canon lenses on it natively and it'll work perfectly. And you know, with these new manufacturers now, with Panasonic, they've got their L mount alliance, Sony have their mount, Canon have their RF mount. And you know, when you invest $2,500 in a lens, or $3,000, which is, you know, pretty much a lot of people spend on lenses these days, it's just such a shame that you're just stuck with that one format. You know, with the older lenses, you could take, we'll say, a lens like this. Ooh, God, that's heavy. You could take your, you know, this is my S1, and I could take my Canon glass and adapt it perfectly to the S1, and it works flawlessly. It works really well. For video, I mean, it won't give you autofocus, but I shoot a lot with the Animos Ninja, and I don't really, sometimes I prefer to shoot without autofocus. I do most commercial jobs with manual focus, because I like to do sort of timed focus pulls and stuff, and it takes too long to set up the digital focus tracking in these cameras. You just got to do it manually and get used to it. So I kind of like shooting manual focus. It doesn't bother me. Obviously, for doing YouTube stuff and pieces to camera and interviews where you want a second camera, it's great to have autofocus. But I could live without the autofocus, but it's just such a shame that you can't adapt the newer ones because of the flange distance. You can't adapt the Sony to the Sony lenses to the Canon RF mount, and vice versa. So effectively then, if you wanted to use, you know, a Canon R5 and a Sony A7S III and use the same lenses, you would literally have to opt for the older type lenses, for the older DSLR lenses, which are designed to have a different flange length than, of course, the mirrorless cameras. And that's the frustrating bit for me. So that's why I'm holding on to this lens, which is not that old. I'm holding on to a few of these lenses, the older type Canon lenses, which still, I mean, come on, it's not going to be that different an image out of that to the new RF 200, 70 to 200, but I'm holding on to a few of those on the off chance that I might sell the S1 camera and its native lens and get a Sony. So just one little thing, obviously the whole overheating saga, it's a funny one, because I think Canon are being a little bit conservative on the actual switch off method that they have for the camera. They're very protective. They don't want the camera to heat up in any way at all. The Sony, as far as I've heard, actually heats up quite a bit in the hand, but they're not as, you know, conservative with how they operate the system, and maybe they're just letting the camera heat up more. I don't know which one actually does heat up more, but Canon, obviously, it's switching off earlier. It is an issue. It is worrying, especially if you're shooting interviews and you're shooting like long format stuff like weddings and stuff. Maybe it's not the best camera for you then. So in terms of overheating, you know, I used to use a Blackmagic production camera, and you could literally not touch the camera. You could fry an egg in the side of the camera. And when you take out the SSD card, which is those big SSD discs, it was literally like burning in your hand. I mean, come on, that thing used to heat up so much. And one time I left it on accidentally in my camera bag, and I was worried. I literally, when I took it out, I said, how did it not set fire to my camera bag? That was the Blackmagic production camera, and that was a big metal camera. There's loads of the structure there to absorb the heat. And I think that the Canon, you know, the R5, they've been very small with the shape. They could have got away with making that camera a lot bigger. They could have had more space around the sensor and literally let the camera sort of breathe more. But the more you do that, the more you're prone to dust as well. So, you know, there's sort of, you have to weigh up the benefits and all that. And, you know, if they didn't allow for image stabilization, in-body image stabilization, they may have been able to mount the sensor on an actual metal block and had a heat sink behind that, and you wouldn't have the overheating problem. Maybe they should have just, you know, stolen some ideas from Panasonic's S1H, whatever. That's the first first camera of its kind to have, you know, image stabilization and, you know, be able to shoot in those resolutions and not overheat. So for me, you know, I shoot a lot of sort of short take stuff. A lot of my own content is B-roll stuff, and B-roll is very easy to shoot and just bursts, you know, especially when you're shooting in high frame rates. You're only shooting for a couple of seconds and you're stopping because you're going to be playing that stuff back much slower. For me, it's not the biggest thing. The biggest thing actually for me is the dynamic range. That is the number one thing, and then the low light. But even the low light, you can work with lights. Dynamic range is the big problem for me with the Canon R5. I'll be honest, that is the worst thing about the camera as far as I'm concerned. So one thing about these cameras that you don't see compared, you'll see everybody saying that the Sony is superior and all this, but you really have to kind of gauge, like, how do they look? You know, I know for a fact that the Canon there, the EOS R here has far less of a dynamic range than the Panasonic S1 has. That is much better dynamic range, but there are times when I just thought looking through the Canon EOS R looked nicer than the S1, and there's times when the S1 looked nicer than the Canon. And, you know, you can pixel peep all you want and you can analyze colors and all this, but how do the cameras look at the end of the day? And also, how is the image sort of rendered out? How is the cadence of the camera? How does movement look in the camera? Is it slightly more digital, or is it slightly more organic, or what way does it look? Older cameras that I used to use, like the Blackmagic BMCC, the Blackmagic cinema camera, they just had a really nice filmic look. You know, they had this lovely texture to them, and I think sometimes that can be more important than, you know, stuff on paper, like how many frames per second it can do at a certain resolution. So I think it'll be nice to see how these cameras kind of line up alongside each other, which one just looks nicer. And will you have people saying, you know what, I got a Sony but I wish I got the Canon? You might have that, but I think as of now, I think a lot of people are drawn to the Sony. So there's my tuppence on it. The bottom line is, you know, if I was to give you advice, should you buy the Sony A7S III or the Canon R5? I think it depends on your situation, your scenario, the type of work you want to do. I think if you want to be a videographer and you don't have that much gear at the moment, you want to get into shooting videos, then hands down the Sony is the one to go for. But if you were a photographer and you wanted just the best bang for buck camera to give you good photography, amazing photography, and really good video, I think amazing video as well, then, you know, stick with Canon and maybe down the line get a Sony as well. It's going to deliver. It's going to be a great camera as well, and it's just down to how you use it as well, because cameras will get you so far. It's what you're doing yourself. I mean, I have videos there on my YouTube channel, and, you know, there's ones I've done, you know, put a lot of work into, and they haven't got that many views. And a couple of years ago I did some really simple stuff with a Canon 60D and the views are 2.5 million, you know. So it's down to your ideas and how you shoot, and to get out there shooting a lot and not to just be caught up pixel peeping and worrying about, you know, what the camera can do. Just get out there and shoot. That is my bottom line, and both are great cameras. So thanks for watching, folks. My name is Hugh Sweeney, and I know there's a lot of content out there, but, you know, if chances are, if you're watching this video, if you've watched this far, you're interested in either camera. And if you want to buy either camera, you know, you could try and buy them through the links I have below here and help out the channel. That would be great. So just check my description below. So thanks as always to everybody who's subscribed to me lately, and I hope you're enjoying the videos, and I'll try and do more. As I do like to say, I try and promise more videos, and if there's anything you want to add in the comments below, I always try and get back to everybody who leaves a comment. And also check me out on Facebook and Instagram as well. I'm on the socials. So until next time, that's all from me on this one. I don't think I'm going to do another video on either camera unless I have them in my hands. So if you're going to buy either camera, I wish you the best of luck and happy shooting. Okay, bye.